please subscribe to the channel. Thanks. Cameras don't die out or get overused. Just check the specs. 2K to 4K is just doubling the size of the image for projection, vertically and horizontally. It is very useful for theatrical purposes such as 4DX or IMAX, but not for home entertainment. You can't even tell the difference unless you sat up close to the television screen, and most televisions are equipped with 4K, but it looks too real and they are too expensive. For this reason, most consumers purchase 2K televisions. And for independent filmmakers, you too should opt to purchase a cheaper camera. You don't really need a cinema camera. Here are a few just to prove to you. The Ursa Mini Pro 12K. It has a Super 35 sensor. It can record in 12K at 60 frames per second, 4K at 240 frames per second. It has 14 stops of dynamic range, built-in ND filters, and it only costs $6,385. Again, $6,385. The Ursa Mini Pro G2 4.6K. It has a Super 35 sensor. It can record 4.6K at 120 frames per second, 1080p at 240 frames per second. It has 12 stops of dynamic range, built-in ND filters, and costs $1,350. Again, $1,350. The Sony FX3. It has a CMOS sensor. It can record 4K at 120 frames per second. It has 15 stops of dynamic range, in-body stabilization, and costs $2,800. Again, $2,800. The Canon EOS C500. It has a Super 35 sensor. It can record 4K at 60 frames per second. It has 15 stops of dynamic range, built-in ND filters, a Canon RAW 10-bit, and is $1,005. Yes, $1,005. The Panasonic BS-1H. It has a full-frame sensor. It can record 6K. It has 14 stops of dynamic range, and only costs $1,899. Again, $1,899. The Panasonic Lumix DCS-AH 24.2 MP. It can record 6K at 24 frames per second. It has 14 stops of dynamic range, and only costs $1,650. Again, $1,650. Lastly, the Sony SF7. It has a Super 35 sensor. It can record 4K at 60 frames per second, 1080p at 180 frames per second. It has 14 stops of dynamic range, built-in ND filters, a 10-bit 422, and only costs $1,000. Again, $1,000.